Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. It is my pleasure to introduce Gerald Clarke. He is an enrolled citizen of the Cahuilla Band of Indians. He lives in the home his grandfather built on the Cahuilla Indian Reservation, where he oversees the Clarke family cattle ranch. He is currently a professor of ethnic studies at the University of California Riverside, where he teaches classes in Native American art, history, and culture. Gerald has exhibited his work extensively and can be seen in numerous exhibitions as well as major museum collections. In 2007, Gerald was awarded an Eiteljorg Museum Fellowship and served as an artist in residence at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico in 2015. In 2020, the Palm Springs Art Museum hosted Gerald Clarke, Falling Rock, the first major retrospective of the artist's work. Clarke is a frequent lecturer speaking about Native art, culture, and social issues. He holds a bachelor's degree in art from the University of Central Arkansas and a master's in painting sculpture from Stephen F. Austin State University, located in Nacogdoches, Texas. Please join me in welcoming him.
Hello, everybody. Appreciate being here. A couple acknowledgments. Thank you to the organizers of this event. Thank you to the UC for the invitation to speak with you today. It's a humbling experience to be able to talk about what you care about and for people to spend their time, their valuable lifetime to come hear me. So it's a humbling thing. I do want to start with some kind of acknowledgement in terms of so what I'm going to be talking about today is, I'm expressing my own personal opinions and ideas. Don't expect everyone to agree with them. But keep in mind that my perspective on the world was formed by the teachings of my elders, by the tribal stories and the ethics that were expressed that way. And so this is my positionality. This is what I bring to the table. As a visual artist practicing for about 30 years, I can tell you that I hate most artists' lectures. They've become quite kind of predictable and kind of one-dimensional, where they talk about, say, some obscure childhood obsession they had with a cartoon character. Then they talk about their training as an artist in the university, where they dabbled in some Eastern religion. Then it goes on to, some obscure kind of exhibits they may have had and what makes, their self-expression unique and important. And I just hate all that, to be honest with you. So what I'm giving you today is kind of a modified artist lecture to talk and to fit with what the theme of this symposium is all about. So again, my name is Gerald Clarke. I'm a citizen of the Cahuilla Band of Indians. So I'm a citizen of the United States. I'm a citizen of the state of California, and I'm a citizen of my tribe. I'm a former tribal leader, elected to 2 different terms on our tribal council. Many travels to DC and to Sacramento, fighting for our tribal sovereignty, which is under constant threat. And all those things have kind of informed who I am as an artist. There you see just an example of work I've been working on. And anytime I fly somewhere, or any of you have experienced this, where you fly somewhere and you're sitting next to someone who is a stranger, and inevitably the question, well, what do you do, right? And you say, well, I'm an artist, and so I tell them. And then the second question is, well, what's your medium? And my answer is always the same: kitchen sink. It's anything I can get my hands on. That's where I make my art. Unlike most artists in the art world, I start my artist lectures with where I'm from, because the environment where I'm from has created the lens in how I see the world. And this is a photograph of one of our pastures. I like how green it is here. I'm Southern California, so we're green right now, but it ain't gonna last. And those little black specks are my family's cattle. So I've taken over my family's cattle ranch. My dad passed away in 2003. I was up for tenure at a university in Oklahoma, and I quit and came home because that's what I was supposed to do. That was my obligation to the family. And so this picture is taken from my aunt's back porch. She turned 89 last weekend, and so I spent a lot of time with her, and we just stare at the cows, and I'm quiet, and after a while she'll start telling me stories, and then, so that's how I learn. So I do live there on the Cahuilla Indian Reservation. I don't know if you have these a lot up here, the mortar stone holes, right, where acorn grinding took place. Unfortunately for a lot of American youth, history is a chapter in a book. It's an hour in their week when they have to go to history class, and they've been robbed. They've been robbed of the human experience that we call history, right? And for me, history is all around me, and that's why I like living in my own tribal community, is because history is there. And for lack of a better way of saying it, these rocks are hard as a rock, right? So those holes took generations, right? Generations of human existence, of family existence to create those things. And so that tells me that I'm home and that I'm there and I'm where I need to be. And so walking around the landscape where my people are from, I know where village sites are. I don't tell anybody where they're at because I know they'll be looted and disrespected. And so that's my hand, and I know places where I can just find pottery shards on the ground, and I never take them, I always leave them. But again, this is history to me. It's not a chapter in a book. It's not a PBS documentary. It's the land. You know, the land carries our history. Now, before I get into too much of the art, and this is the first artwork I'm going to show you, I like to be very honest about who I am and my lineage. So my dad was the native, and my mom was a white woman whose family came to California during the Dust Bowl, seeking better opportunities, and a lot of people came to California that way, right? And so my dad was the native, and that's represented with the red version of me, and then my mom being the white version of me, and then there I am in the middle. And the title here, The Problem with Color Theory. So do we have any art people in the crowd? Okay, all right, got a couple, that's good. What do you get when you mix equal parts of red and white? I'm not pink. Do you understand that? And so that's what we've done in this country, is we've dumbed down identity, and we've dumbed down ethnicity into these stupid categories. And so the problem with color theory, right, it's just early on, right? Notice the date on this work, 22 years. I can't believe I've been working this long doing these things. But I want to be honest with you of who I am. And I go through life disappointing people, okay? Oh, you're tribal? You know, how much are you, right? And then when I say, well, I'm actually, according to the Bureau of Indian Affairs, my blood quantum is 3/8. And so I go through life disappointing people, okay? Oh, I get that a lot, right? And that's where we're at. That's where we're at in American society and how we judge people. This is my parents. I'm getting choked up. They were married 2 years before Loving versus Virginia, if you know that case, right? This is California, though. Good-looking people, right? I come from good-looking people. And, of course, their marriage didn't last, but this is who I am. This is who I am. I mentioned that the Bureau of Indian Affairs says my blood quantum is 3/8, okay? And, yeah, people are disappointed to hear that. And I'm kind of bothered by it as well, right? Because it'd be different if I only experienced 3/8 of the poverty. It'd be different if I only experienced 3/8 of the discrimination, right? Of the domestic violence, of the alcoholism. You know, it does a disservice when we boil identity down to simply blood quantum. Growing up in California, I grew up in the United States, right, in the 70s. And American boys, back in my time, we played cowboys and Indians, right? We have that binary, right, that we play, right? Here's the problem. I grew up as a cowboy, even though I was on the reservation. And the picture there on the left, that's my dad and my grandpa. They were hardcore Indian cowboys. And that's pistols on their belts, by the way. And then there's my dad in the middle. And then I had no choice, right? Look at me, I'm over there on the right, and I'm probably 6 years old. They already got me on the tractor, right? And so this is how I grew up, and I'm not claiming to be very intelligent, right? But even as a kid, I was pretty savvy. And I saw that the categories and the stereotypes that Americans held, that most people hold, are just wrong and just limited and just fake, right? And so I realized that. So again, trying to be honest with you, here's my cows. And I was feeding cows yesterday morning before I drove 4.5 hours to come up here, right? And this is, I find being a rancher is really, as an artist and as an academic, it's really easy to start living inside your head, right? And everything becomes an idea and becomes abstract and becomes politicized. Tell that to 800-pound steer who's coming down the chute at you, you know. Ranching life gets real quick, and it's a really good complement to being an academic or being an artist. And so this is part of my identity, okay? That's me in the cowboy hat in the middle, and I'm not going to tell you what I'm doing to that little bull calf. He'll get over it. Actually, I'll have to leave fairly early today because we're getting ready for our annual Clarke family cattle roundup there on the reservation, where we bring in cowboys from other reservations, and we have this big barbecue and we work our cattle. And we're one of the last families in California, down there in Southern California, to continue to do this kind of thing. Keep in mind the Kumeyaay, the Ipai and the Tipai, the Payumkawichum, the Cahuilla down in Southern California. We were the first cowboys in California because when the Spaniards brought their livestock to set up the missions, they didn't have enough people to help work that livestock. And so we were the first California cowboys, and I've continued that. And so my identity is all tied up in all these kinds of histories, right? And a lot of times I talk about sovereign identity, right? If you're a Native American artist, I should be wearing a lot more turquoise now, right? And there's these stereotypes that we want people to fit into, right? And sovereignty means deciding for yourself who you are and not allowing the dominant culture to decide who you are and what you should be, right? And you know, again, not that I'm smart, but I learned this very early on in my life that this is important to do. And as a Native artist, the art world itself, there's some Native artists that are very prominent in the art world now, but there are only certain kinds of artists that get prominent in the art world, and it's because they fit these preconceived ideas, right? And right now, if you're angry, you're Indian activist kind of thing, they're putting it in your art, then yeah, you're going to be accepted. If you're doing kind of traditional things, maybe not so much. My good friend Gordon Johnson from the Pala Reservation is a writer. He says there, he says, I can't speak for everyone, but I think Native art is an expression of cultural sovereignty, which in the biggest picture is the ability of Native people to determine who they are. I see a lot of people who are expressing their Native sovereignty by expressing anger towards the status quo, towards different institutions. And I understand the anger, but when you're doing that, you're actually allowing those outside institutions to shape who you are as a person and your perspectives on the world, right? And so you have to be brave and courageous and be willing to be outside of the system. And so I've been making art for 30 years. I'm not real prominent in the art world, and I think there's a reason for that, okay? I've often tried to show mostly in areas where my own tribe can see my work, because there are, you guys know some of the names from the European art world, whether it's Warhol or Jackson Pollock or what have you. None of those people made art for my community. They can claim they did, but that doesn't mean they were. I included all humanity. Well, okay, sure, right? But nobody was making work for my community, and so that's what I've dedicated myself to. And in doing so, I'm probably not going to be on top of the art world. I heard some anger earlier, I think, in the session earlier, and I understand it. I certainly understand the anger. And I've been angry for a long time. And so one of the things I've found about my artwork is that when it comes from my everyday life, it seems to be the most successful, the most relevant. And so way back in 2002 or so, I made this branding iron here. Can you see what it says? Yeah, right? And so from the cattle ranch, right, and being an artist, so I made this branding iron as a sculpture, or, you know, not as a branding iron, but as a sculpture. And the title, To the Discriminating Collector. And in the art world, discrimination is actually a good thing, right? The fine arts. Do you do native art or do you do fine art? You see that? You see what's going on there, right? And so, again, my ignorance is a source of constant amazement to me. And I made that as a sculpture, and then like 2 or 3 years later, I was laying in bed, I remember the moment, and I thought to myself, I should use that thing. And so I built a fire in my front yard, and I soaked some watercolor paper, and I branded the word right into the paper. And I did that, and I put that away, and then I started doing more of it. And I returned to that in 2016 when I saw all the cultural violence that was happening in this country with the anti-immigration sentiment, with the polarization of the right and the left, a lot of violence, with the protests or what have you. And I'm not a violent person, but this process of making these branded prints, I call them prints, I don't know what else to call them. I like the violence of making them because the violence of making them matches what I was seeing in society and what I continue to see in society today. And so by the way, I was told I was too dumb for college, and so I went to welding school out of high school. What they really meant was I was too poor and too brown for college. Now I'm a tenured full professor in the UC system, so the joke's on them. Although I imagine my high school teachers are rolling over in their graves. But there you see me heating up the branding irons and making these prints. The image on the right was an interesting project where I was at an artist residency, and one of the other artists picked up this used book, and the title of the book was Disinherited, the Lost Birthright of the American Indian, and it was about the loss of land through colonization of the United States. And she picked that up. She said, "Hey, Gerald, I got this for you. I thought you might find that interesting." I said, "Oh, thank you. Put it right there." And then I branded the cover. And, if you go to the library here at UCSB, there are probably, I don't know, someone give me a number. How many books on Native people here at the library, would you say? Rough estimate? 1,000?
We had a really...
10?
Probably 10.
Probably 10.
But there's a section, but we have our own space in the AIIC with a bunch of Native books.
Gotcha. Well, when you look at, hey, go ahead.
Hey, recently I went up to the junior college in Santa Barbara. They had historical books about the real history of Tennessee in the last 30 or 40 years. No books.
Yeah.
Shumash stuff about in that library used to be like about 80 or 20 books.
Well, a lot of times, right, even if there are books, 98% of them are written by non-natives, right? And the history of this country, and particularly here in California, is a history of extraction. They extracted the people from the land. They extracted the gold from the land. They extracted the timber from the land. That never stopped, and it continues, particularly in universities such as this, where now academics are extracting our stories and our cultures for their dissertations, right? And so that's something I have a problem with. And so I started branding these books as a way to take this knowledge back, right? Because once they publish their dissertations, a lot of that knowledge then, ends up somewhere on someone's bookshelf, and it doesn't come back to the community where it belongs, right? And so when here's another book right here, Indian Painters and White Patrons, that I've branded the cover of. And what I do is I brand the cover, and then I go to the title page, I sign it and date it, and now it's my sculpture. It's like the ultimate plagiarism, right? But it's symbolically, it's taking back the knowledge. And I think about the question, right? Who controls the narrative, right? If we're not writing the books, then who controls the narrative? That's constantly kind of on my mind. And so this is one of my sculptures that's also a working gumball machine. And so you can buy part of the art with your quarter. And inside, you guys remember the plastic capsules that you get the ring in or the slime or whatever? So I got a bunch of those capsules, and what I did was I got a bunch of books written by Native authors, whether they be novels, poetry, social sciences, political science, whatever, right? And unfortunately, I cut these books up, and I took each page and I put one page in each of these capsules. And the title is Indian Wisdom, right? And I had the audacity to put my own picture on the cover, right? I also have a good sense of humor. But when you put in your quarter, you actually do get some Indian wisdom, right? And I chose books where the top of the page had the author's name and also the title of the book. So it was my hope that they would read this and say, I'm going to go check out this book, right? It was a way of promoting Indian wisdom, right? And then you guys recognize the end of the trail figurine on the top there. I bought that, and then I broke his spear off and I replaced it with a pencil. I don't know if you can see that. And in some ways, I felt like that's a self-portrait because I'm constantly told what Native art should be. I'm constantly told what I tell me, Gerald, are you making Native American art? Right? So can you tell I do a lot of different things? So I had this large retrospective mid-career at Palm Springs Art Museum. It was 78 works over 30 years. I think most people who came to the museum thought it was a really good group show when it was just me, right? I was told in graduate school I was going to be a jack of all trades and a master of none. I never believed that. I didn't go to the university to learn or to make art. I went there to learn and prepare for a lifetime of making art. And so I did a lot of different things. My professors didn't like it. They wanted to kind of funnel me into a specific area, and I wouldn't do it. And then when I had that show, I was like, oh, I was right. It felt really validating. So that's obviously me, self-portrait, right? Everything that you see there are words, okay? And so oftentimes artists are kind of described as being naturally talented. Have you heard that? Naturally talented. I hate that because what it does is it dismisses the decades of hard work and practice. Now, that's not to say I'm not talented, because the talent I was born with is I can put on an expensive suit and I can always make it look shabby. I don't know, it's just a natural thing for me. But here's a detail, and I did this in 2016. And what I did was, I think one of my talents is, I was at like Walmart or Staples or something, and they had this kit, make your own rubber stamp. And I think it was for like stamping your envelopes or something, like a mass mail out. And I was like, well, that's cool, but how can I use it as a drawing tool? And so what I did is I just stamp, right, like this, right? And if you can do light and dark, and then it's just like regular drawing, right? But my image there is stamped with, I made this in 2016 with the 6 names of the most prescribed depression meds in 2016. Okay? So oftentimes people say, well, that's kind of weird, right? Well, what's up with that? Earlier today, I heard some of the history and some of the trauma and some of the pain. The history of this country and the history of Native people and the history of my family is a tragic one, right? And I go through life carrying that weight, okay? And I'm carrying it right now. And I carry it into the classroom, and I carry it into the studio. And if I dwell on that history too much, I think I would fall into a depression I would probably never recover from, okay? But I have 2 daughters, and I tell them, actually, we are the biggest success story in America because we survived genocide. Each one of us are a walking miracle because we weren't supposed to be here. And if the gold rush had happened in Southern California, then I wouldn't be here. Let's just admit it, right? It was devastating, right, on people. And again, artists typical artist lecture, they're talking about self-expression, and I'm like, self-expression? Who am I to express myself when I have this heavy history, that I hear the pain and the trauma, the stories of my aunt? Who am I to express myself, right? And I don't express myself. I don't even think about that. And the way I see it is it's kind of like breathing. All of you, I think, are breathing. Yes? There's a couple I'm not sure about over here. You don't have to think about it, right? And that's how I think about self-expression. I don't think about it at all. I think about my community. I think about the stories. I think about the history, right? And so I carry that into the studio with me. The role of the artist, right? I think the art world tries to portray it as a magnifying glass, that somehow artists are these philosophers that can look on society. We form our judgments. We talk about how much more informed we are, how much better off we are than the average person. It's to do it right, you have to be a mirror, right? And this sounds contradictory, but one of the things I've found over 30 years is the more personal you make your work, the more universal it becomes. Because we all feel envy and love and hate and hurt, right? We all feel those things. And I'm not, so the hardest thing I think for an artist, and I don't see it a lot, is honesty. I heard that word honesty earlier today. You have to be painfully honest with yourself about who you are and about how you view things, right? And you've got to get into the ugly. You got to get all the way to the heart of it. And I can make art that's offensive to most people. I used to love doing it when I was 15, okay? But it's much more interesting for me to make art about the things that I find offensive, because this is that history. I find the history offensive, right? And you got to get in there and you got to be honest with yourself. Not how you want people to think you are, but how you really are, right? And that's tough. And so when I don't think about self-expression, right? I think, why don't we have more art lectures where we're talking responsibility? Why don't we have more lectures that are talking about obligation, right? This is the issues I have with the art world, really. And I have a deep respect for my family, my ancestors, my community. That's why I live there, right? I would be much more successful if I lived in Santa Fe. I'd be much more successful if I lived in New York City, right? But how many of my people are going to see my work there, right? And so these responsibility and obligations, it's not about me, right? It's about me as a part of something bigger than myself, right? And that's part of that honesty too, acknowledging as a Native person how much of the dominant culture, Western culture, that I've actually internalized. I was talking to my partner earlier. I just came to a realization just a couple weeks ago that all the newer homes on our reservation, it's a rural reservation, 20,000 acres, all the newer homes are up on hills, up on hilltops, right? And then those people always complain about the wind. And then I look around and I live in an old home, and I see all the old homes, and they're all down low, right? So there was this understanding of the land then that now we want to look down on people. We want to have our view, right? We want to have a nice view. That's like a visual manifest destiny, kind of, that we've internalized, right? So much we've internalized as Native people, ideas of the dominant culture, and then we're not honest with ourselves that, you know, these are things that we need to overcome, right? So I went to college by accident. I was chasing a girl, got a couple art degrees or what have you, started teaching at a community college and working my way up. Come back to the reservation. You got to understand, it's first generation. And I remember my dad saying, "Are you still in school?" And I was like, "Yeah, I just got my master's and I was just working on thesis and stuff." You know, it was just like outside of their norm. But I come home and I'm like, well, again, who's making art for my community, right? Sure as hell better be me, right? That's that obligation, that's that responsibility. And so I started my Cahuilla road sign project. And I did a series of road signs because our language is endangered, like many languages, indigenous languages are endangered. And so I did a series of road signs, and I put them up along the dirt roads of our reservation. There's no law on the reservation. I didn't ask any permission, I just did it, right? And this is Nacogdoches, which means I am singing. So the Cahuilla is large, and then the English is small, subtitled, right? And guess what? Nobody in my community thought it was art, just a road sign. Right? Who cares? I don't care. I don't care if they think it's art or not. You know what they thought? They thought they were pretty cool. What more can you ask for, right? And people would stop off at my dad's house and say, yeah, how do you pronounce that, right? And it kind of fostered this kind of interest again in our language. And they were up for several weeks. And at the time I was teaching in Oklahoma, and my dad calls me one day, and he says, son, I have something to tell you. Oh yeah, what's going on? He said, yeah, apparently one of my cousins got all drugged up and drunk and shot him up with a shotgun. And I just started laughing. And so, yeah, if you live in the country, that's the natural life of a sign, right? But in university settings, I call that reservation art criticism. But guess what happened? The community was upset. That was theirs now. How dare you? Again, how much can you ask for as an artist for a community to take ownership, right, of what you've done? That's a beautiful thing. And it's really amazing to me when you make, a lot of you think that the artist knows everything about the work, and it's just not true. I make art and it constantly teaches me when I see you looking at it, when I see it take a life of its own or a death of its own, and I learn from that. I'm constantly learning from these things. Since then, I've abandoned the English language. I found it unnecessary to include that on these signs. So Mukut is the name of our creator. There's no English necessary here, right? And thinking about it. And then during COVID, I did a citywide installation in the city parks in Palm Springs. And you see what I've done here. I've abandoned the English, and you don't need it. So Mesaha, that's our word for the rattlesnake, right? Kish for our home, Isil is coyote. And I put them up in the city parks there in Palm Springs. Why do I do these road signs? First of all, I don't have a right to express myself in a mess with everyday reality of people. Who am I? Who am I to do that, right? And those of you who drove here today, do you understand that you ignored at least 80% of the signs like this that you passed? I like the fact that they're kind of invisible and they're not invasive on your everyday reality. I could do an 8-foot penis on the side of the road and express myself, right? And everybody would ooh and on it, and some people would complain and stuff, but what's really going on there? Nothing's going on there, right? It's just a clickbait kind of thing. There's no meaning, right? Whereas this, I like, you can choose to acknowledge this or not, right? I do these for two reasons. Number one is I want to remind the non-natives, this is Coachella Valley, Palm Springs, that's Cahuilla land right there, right? So I want to remind the non-natives, this ain't the new world, right? We were here way before Walmart and the Apple Store, right? So I want them to understand that, right? But second, and probably more important thing, is Deborah Miranda. You guys know Deborah? She'd probably come by here before, you know. I remember in Bad India, she says, erasure is a bitch, right? Tell me about it. If you're native and you know all about erasure, right? And so the real reason why I do these is I want to validate native people and our experience and our existence in these lands. We belong here, right? We've always been here. And to never see that, to have it erased or buried under, a corporation, under a university, right? It's painful, right? I don't know if you guys are listening to Dead Pioneers, Greg Deal's punk band. He talks about these things. He's like, man, this is, it makes me tired. It makes me tired to be erased constantly. So I want to do something about that. I'm into plants, so I enjoyed the TEK discussion earlier. I was saying just last night, I'm currently teaching a class that I designed called California Native Cultures, and I cooked yucca blossoms for my class a couple weeks ago, and then we're working on acorn this week, so I'll be cooking that Monday night for class on Tuesday. And so, yeah, we don't worship the yucca, but it's really important in terms of fibers for cordage, for rope making, for sandal making. I don't know if you've ever eaten the stalk. Raw is like a cross between, I think it's a cross between a celery and an apple, and then the blossoms or the seed pods later on. I appreciate the discussion yesterday. Sage's really important discussion on food sovereignty. And again, I think you can sense kitchen sink here. So here's a painting, right? And Our Lady of San Jacinto, that's the mountain range closest to us. And so paying homage to our history, right? And I'll show these paintings like this, and they're like, well, wait a minute, Gerald, I thought you were a conceptual artist. Again, the art world trying to categorize me into being simply one-dimensional. I don't know if this image reminds you of anything. We don't do drums down south, we're gourd rattles. I'm a traditional singer, and we sing bird songs. And so I made this halo of birdsong rattles around the yucca. But I don't know if this reminds you of anything, but keep in mind, I'm influenced by everything. I was influenced earlier today, listening to this discussions. As an artist, you're influenced by everything, either positively or negatively, right? But there's my influence, right? You see that? And I love the shape of the yucca blossoms that they make, and it's very much like this halo, the Virgin of Guadalupe, right? Southern California used to be Mexico. This all used to be Mexico, right? And again, so the art world wants to paint me into a singular kind of thing. I want you to be a conceptual artist. I want you to be a performance artist. And I just have no interest in doing one singular kind of thing. And so you see there, food, fiber, soap is our resource. That would have never been made if I hadn't been told I was too dumb for college, because that's steel and aluminum is welded up, in my shop. And Pono, can I tell you that I've never heard my aunt speak our language until COVID, when I was spending a lot of time with her. And you just, for those of you young people, just sit there. Don't say nothing. Just sit there. And eventually they'll start letting go with that knowledge, that wisdom. And so this last couple weeks when I made the yucca blossoms, I took some to my aunt. She hadn't had them in probably 70 years or more. And she said I did a pretty good job. So that's way better hearing than some kind of award, I have to say. But as an artist, again, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, what I think that my tribe wants me to do, what my community needs to see, right? And so that's that creative sovereignty, right? And it's not self-expression. That's not what I'm talking about, right? It's understanding that you're part of something way bigger than yourself. Who gives? Well, I shouldn't say, but it's not about me. It's not about me. Okay, so I did want to talk, because I think part of this cultural sovereignty, right, is, again, challenging your own beliefs, right? And so I was part of a group of people that were writing the land acknowledgement for UCR, okay? And they had different constituencies across campus who were part of helping to form this community statement, right? And people were putting, well, we need to acknowledge Mother Earth, right? And these lands of Turtle Island, right? And I was like, well, wait a minute. And can I tell you, I feel very blessed because UCR is in the traditional homelands of the Cahuilla people. And I think my situation is so unique that I can be a member of my community, live on the reservation, and also teach at a Division I research university. It's amazing. It's an amazing opportunity. But I brought up the fact that when we look at the Cahuilla creation story, there's no reference at all to Mother Earth. We don't have that concept. There's no Turtle Island. I think that comes from the Anishinaabe people, which are a couple thousand miles away from here, right? So I was the one that says, no, we need to acknowledge Mukut and Timiawit, right? Menil, or the Moon Maiden, is also part of our history, and Isil, or the Coyote, right? And I find that, I'll talk about it in a second, but people were taken back by that, right? And, I think there's power in the particulars and understanding knowledge, which Sage said yesterday about acknowledging the plants in your area, right? That the power is in that area, right? Specific to a specific place. And, we all understand cultural appropriation, I think. It's hard to define, but I know it when I see it. It's that kind of thing. And the fashion world, I think, is the absolute worst in terms of cultural appropriation. But obviously, I am not part of the fashion industry, so you can tell by that. But one thing that I don't hear spoken about cultural appropriation is, and I want you to think about this, I am very careful not to culturally appropriate from my own culture. Okay, we're always talking about outsiders, right? But I also am conscious of within my own culture. There are some visuals in our creation story that would make really incredible, interesting art, but that's not for you. You understand? That's not for the dominant culture. That's just for us. And so I'm constantly kind of debating, when I get an idea, debating with myself whether that's appropriate or not, right? And I think, to be honest with you, so a lot of people are identifying, right, as Native or as Indigenous. I don't know, you remember this commercial? You guys remember this commercial? Do you know 23andMe is almost, they're on the brink of bankruptcy? Did you know that? Yeah. So if you remember this commercial, this woman found out she was like 6% Native, and then she had to redecorate her home or something, And I think DNA has further confused people. It hasn't clarified anything. It's further confused people, right? And the best way I can illustrate it is to tell you a story. So my elder, who I learned from, who actually gave me this ring, I wear proudly, I wanted to learn to sing the songs. And so I go to his house and I knock on the door and he opens it up and I introduce myself in terms of who I'm related to, because he was a relative of mine, right? So I tell my clan and, different family, and he, oh yeah, well, we're related. Nice to meet you. And he said, you see that big pile of wood over there? And I said, oh yeah. He said, do you think you could cut it up for me because it's too big for me to carry? Because he was elderly at the time. I said, yeah, sure, I can go do that. So I went over there, all dusty and sweaty, and I chopped up all that wood to this really small. I come back, and I said, okay, I'm done. He said, oh, thank you. Salam, like that. All right, so I get back in my truck and I go home, and then the following week, and I come back, and he answered the door. Oh, you're back. He was kind of surprised, actually. And he said, hey, you know that wood you cut up? He says, thanks so much. He's like, do you think you could wheelbarrow it over here and stack it close to the house? Because my wife and I, it's hard for us. I was like, no problem. Went over there, did all that, got all sweaty and hot. Come back and had it all piled, and I said, yeah, I got it all done. He said, oh, thank you very much. Salam. Right, thanks. All right, so I go home. The next weekend, I come back, and he said, hey, you're back. He said, come in, I want to teach you something. So I had the DNA, but that wasn't enough. You understand? I had to prove myself that I valued what he was going to teach me. You see? It's not about DNA, right? It's about being invested into, a lot of people are claiming the identity. A lot of people are claiming the privileges that go with the identity. But you gotta claim the responsibility and the obligation and the hard work along with it. And that was my reward. And he came in, and I was terrified. He said, sing me a song. It's like, oh man. So I sang a song. He said, all right, okay. And he ended up teaching me. And so I take identity very seriously. And you remember that slide, right? So again, my dad, by the Bureau of Indian Affairs, is considered 7/8 Native. And it's because way back there was a German immigrant on his side, right? What was the German immigrant's name? Clarke. Oh, sorry. That's where that comes from, okay? But also, my grandparents met at Sherman Indian School, And my grandmother was Cahuilla, that's why we're registered there, but my grandfather was part Wallapai, and I guess he had that German in him, but also part Hoopa. So I have relatives in Peach Springs, Arizona, and I have relatives up at the Hoopa Reservation, okay? But I don't claim to be a Cahuilla, Wallapai, Hoopa artist because I wasn't raised in their system. I don't understand the obligations and the responsibilities that go with claiming that, okay? My responsibility is to keep those family ties together, and Nina and I were up at Hoopa a couple years ago during COVID and reacquainting with relatives and stuff, but it's a very particular thing. Here's my grandparents, by the way, and 3 of their grandchildren, and so my grandfather, again, had these different tribal identities, right? And then my grandmother. And I'm getting into this because one of our leaders, our Cahuilla leaders, Rupert Costo, anybody raise your hand if you've heard the name? A whopping 3. Rupert Costo was chairman of my tribe in the late 60s, right before my dad was chairman. And you can see there he's author, publisher, philanthropist, and founders of the American Indian Historical Society, and also a farmer, cattle rancher, surveyor, mineralogist. I don't know if I can say that. He also did something kind of crazy, typical Cahuilla Indian man. He advocated the UC system to establish a UC in the Inland Empire, what we call the Inland Empire down in Southern California. Guess what school that became? UC Riverside, where I teach, right? And so today we have the Costo Library on the 4th floor of our university library with his collection in there. And there's a building called Costo Hall where Native student programs and other student associations are housed in this building, okay? And my daughter got a bachelor's of creative writing there at UCR a couple years ago. And when she went through student orientation, I said, did they mention Rupert? Did they mention Rupert? She's like, no. And so most of the students who go through there don't understand. It was actually a Cahuilla Indian that helped get UC established in the Inland Empire, UC Riverside, right? And so that's one of the things that we're working on to make that known. And one of the things, though, that he says, right, in this publication, he talks about the dangers of the rise of pan-Indianism. So when you start grasping at, and again, people who are discovering their indigeneity, I applaud you for that, but I want to warn you that you've got to do the deep dive, and you got to do that honesty, right? And you understand that oftentimes we erase our particular tribal beliefs and we substitute these kind of general ideas. I'm not saying that tribes can't learn from one another, and I think there's an area for that. But for the Cahuilla people, when our twin creators, when they are born, they did not smudge themselves with sage. And my elder told me his mom would smudge the house in the spring to get all the spiders and stuff out that kind of came in during the winter. This wasn't a spiritual thing for us at all. We smoked tobacco, and the twin creators, they smoked tobacco before they started the act of creation, right? And I grow the real tobacco, the indigenous tobacco that grows there in Southern California. And so I warn people that beware. You have an obligation, a responsibility that if you're going to claim that identity, you've got to go all the way. You can't just do the lowest hanging fruit. So with that, and I don't know if you know Iron Eyes Cody, right? Oscar de la Corte was his name. He's Italian, and yet he lives his life. And for America, he represented Indians throughout the 70s and into the 80s. I would also say that we had probably the most egregious example of ethnic fraud in academia at UCR, right? And I was a part of addressing that over the last few years. And we came to this agreement to separate with this person, which will take place later this summer, okay? And then when that became public, I was at Indian Market in Santa Fe actually hanging out with some people. And I got calls from the LA Times, the New York Times, higher ed online, all these different places. And I told these reporters how painful the whole situation was and how it was a lose-lose situation for everyone involved, right? And it was a pain to my soul that even having to deal with this. But again, I felt this responsibility or obligation to my community. I can't do what I want to do, what's comfortable, what's easy. I had to do something about that. And I told these reporters how painful it was, and nobody was benefiting from any of this. And then the articles come out, and guess what they put? You know, it was all about the conflict. It was all about, this evil person and the ineptitude of the institution, all this stuff. And they didn't put anything about the pain that it caused to the community. That's what I call American conflict resolution, which is resolution through conflict. It doesn't have to be that way. It's a sad thing, right? It's a sad thing to have to deal with. Hope I didn't bum you out too much. So my tribe are actually known as basket makers, and basket weaving is a gendered art. So men are not allowed to do that. Now I used to say it's only a women's art, and a lot of times the females in my class would go like this. They'd be all mad, right? Why? Because they're bringing the positionality of the dominant culture that somehow men are up here and women are down here. That's not an indigenous way of thinking at all, right? You take the hierarchy, you lay it over, and it's a spectrum of experience, a spectrum of how we contribute to our people, right? So here's a couple of baskets from relatives of mine who are at the Palm Springs Art Museum. And I just want to point out, you see that 5-pointed star in the design? It's kind of the one on the right. It's implied. It's less easy to see. This is, well, let me go. So where does that come from? A lot of people were speculating, the non-natives were speculating that, oh, it's a star, so it's the North Star or whatever, and it's symbolic of the astronomy that was known at the time, whatever. All you got to do is look around. All you got to do is look around. So here are a couple of our sacred plants. Guess what their flowers are shaped like? Right? And so pivot is our tobacco that grows. Both these plants, the flowers open only at night, so they're relatives to Menyo, the moon maiden, right? And so there you see, there's the 5-pointed star. And then it's implied on the one on the right, and then those triangular kind of designs you see, those are the basket designs for us for the bat that flies around at night, okay? That are so important to our ecology, yes? So they gave me access to these baskets, and they commissioned me to make some sculptures. And so this is one of the sculptures I did. This is at the Autry Museum downstairs. Continuum basket, I call this series, because it is. It's a continuation of our creative expressions as a people, right? It's made out of over 600 crushed beer cans and soda cans. So it's about 5 feet across. The blue is Pepsi. Labatt's, if you know that beer. The white or the silver is Coors Light and Diet Coke. The green is Mountain Dew and Sprite, right? And I'm paying homage to this basketry tradition, but I'm not making baskets because I respect that tradition, right? But I'm also acknowledging the history of alcoholism and diabetes in our community through alcohol and through sugar, through soda, right? And the dominant, I never want to be accused of romanticizing my culture because the dominant culture does that enough, right? Oh, you're just spiritual, you're intuitive, you're one with nature, right? That BS, right? And so I acknowledge the reality. I have the potential of being at least a 3rd-generation alcoholic. And when people talk about alcoholism in the community, well, it's just biological. You guys are just that way. You can't hold your drink, right? When they do that, they completely ignore the real context, which is the trauma, the historical traumas, right? And so the traumas are part of our community, right? But here's the thing, you get back and you look at these things, and they're actually quite beautiful. And just like my community, if you watch evening news and you see a story about Indian reservations, it's always the poverty, it's the domestic violence, drug abuse, alcoholism, all those things, right? Guess what? There's no other place on this earth I'd rather live than my community, right? So here's my sketch. I got my daughter's Sharpies out. Here's my sketch, and I combine those two baskets. So there's the tobacco flower, and then there's the bats. You see the bats? And then I put a little bit of blue on there because, again, both come out at night, right? And so I created this work, over 1,800 crushed beer cans and soda cans, using the color of the cans, right? Paying homage to the basketry tradition, but acknowledging the realities of my community. And I always try to show these where people will first see them from like 70, 80 feet away. And they're like, oh, it's like beadwork. Oh, so nice, right? Then they get up close and like, oh, it's just cans, right? Kind of like when they meet me and they're disappointed, that kind of thing, right? And so there you see the sketch next to the actual one. Turned out pretty good. But it's about being honest, not trying to portray what you think people want to see, right? And again, it's about community, really. It's hard to make these things and see these things. So this is my shop. And so what I do is I get up so I can see the pattern. You can't see it up close when you're making it. So there I am standing up on my shop. You can see I have really elaborate artist's clothing on and such. Here's another one. This one is the biggest one I've ever made. This is 10 feet across, so it's probably like 2,400 counts. And again, none of this would have ever happened if I hadn't been told I was too dumb for college, because I learned how to weld. Oh, I think I have a little video where I'm welding these things up, but we don't have to watch that. We'll do
How long did it take you to drink them?
Everyone asks me that. And if I drank them all, I would have cirrhosis of the liver and diabetes, right? So usually I get people to
You worked at the recycling center?
the first ones I actually bought cans from a recycling center, but then that guy closed. So a lot of times I just get volunteer people. It takes me a long time to do these, actually. So here's the one, there's the frame, and so this is the newest one. This is kind of the Big Bang. I see this as our creation, right? With that kind of Big Bang in the middle and then the sunlight coming in from the edges or what have you. The largest artwork I've ever made is this one as part of Desert X down in the Coachella Valley. And that's me. So it was a huge land basket that I made out of straw wattles or straw tubes. And then the basket design itself was actually like a deck that you could walk on. Okay, so it was a sculpture you could walk on. But here's the thing, the title was Immersion, and the entire sculpture was a giant board game. And so I also made game cards, and you could pull them up on your phone, and it was like a Native American Trivial Pursuit. And so you, depending on what path you entered, and of course it was lined up with the cardinal directions, you would get different categories of questions, and you had to play your way into the center of the game. And in the center I had QR codes. So one of the QR codes would take you to my elder who would tell the Nacogdoches story, all in the Cahuilla language with no English translations. That was the reward, to hear the language of that land that had been spoken for time immemorial, right? It doesn't matter to me if you knew what it was saying, just hearing that language I felt like was a gift, right? And so what happened? What happened? Most Americans cheated to get to the middle. Why did they cheat? Because they don't know the history of this land. They don't know the history of our cultures and how we believe, right? That was the point of the artwork. I wanted people to come there and to understand how little that they actually know, right? And I will tell you this, that this was written about in the New York Times and the LA Times. Woo, okay, I made it, right? It was the art critics who wrote about it didn't review the work. They described it. Okay, there was no critique, right? Why is that? Because they don't understand my culture. They don't understand that when I was standing there, there would be like 100 people there at a time, and this basket sculpture, right? Guess what it did? It functioned exactly like a basket. It gathered. In this case, it gathered people. It was a beautiful thing. But the art people who were writing about this didn't understand that because they don't understand the culture and how baskets function, right? And isn't it interesting, in this march right now in the art world, in America, in universities, for this global knowledge, for global identity, for this kind of big picture thinking, that you would think that they would train themselves to be able to look at the art of other cultures, but they can't. They have their own positionality, and so I got no review, I got no critic, right? I got no feedback. They just described the work, and so this is how it fit in the environment too, by the way. So real quick, almost done. So my current project I'll be doing up in Colorado this summer. You guys all know historical monuments along the highways and different things, right? And oftentimes we talk about these in my classes. There's this thing called firsting and lasting. So when you see these monuments, this is the first log cabin in Virginia. This is the first school in California. What does that mean, right? Do you understand the connotations are that there was no education before the Spanish came here? Well, that ain't right, right? And so I'm doing a series of fake hysterical monuments where I'm making fun of the colonizers' history. I'm correcting the colonizers' history, and I'm writing some of my own, right? Trying to undermine those practices and question it. I hope I didn't bum everyone out too bad with what I had to say. But again, Deborah Miranda, when she talks about, if I focus on everything that we have lost through genocide, right? It's a tragic thing. It's a horrible, horrible thing, right? But this is where we're at right now. You take the pieces and you put it back again, and you can still make something pretty beautiful, right? So with that, Cahuilla, we say achma pi pachimkal, which is, Cahuilla have no word for thank you. It was unnecessary, because when you live in a culture where generosity is the expectation, something like thank you was unnecessary. You need it in English, right? So instead we say, achma, it's good. It was good that we were gathered here today. Right? It's good, right? So with that, I thank you for your patience and your understanding, and I'm humbled. I kind of went over, so I don't know. I went 5 minutes over.
Well, thank you for showing us your subversive work, and I love it. It's subversive. I love that you talked about the dangers of pan-Indianism, especially here, because you and I probably both go to different universities and see pan-Indianism, and I love that the way that I didn't see it here is that there was not a ribbon skirt in the place. And currently, when I travel in different places, the young women have attached themselves to these ribbon skirts which aren't from here, or aren't maybe not from where you are from. And so there's this whole pan-Indianism thing, and it makes me sad, because they've all missed the opportunity to do the deep dive into who they are and where they come from. And part of that, I think my grandfather, who's Cahuilla, he taught me to say, well, what tribe are you? Who are your people? Mm-hmm. What's your family? And I think I know your Hualapai side, actually, now that I know your Hualapai. Oh, yeah. Because that's how we become enmeshed in each other and interrelated, as we connect by our differences, not necessarily our similarities. And so I just wanted to say that I caught that in your presentation, and hopefully the young people feel good that they're not caught up in pan-Indianism, because it's not a good thing. And you also mentioned the Big Bang in the last piece in creation. And I always pictured the Cahuilla creation story as us knowing that there was a Big Bang. And so I guess you're confirming that. We knew there was a Big Bang a long time ago. And so the question is, so cultural appropriation, you talked about not wanting to show too much. And I saw something on Instagram today, which was a video on a news channel where they were showing how to go out and get yucca. I think it was Assemblyman Ramos maybe was taking people out, and it was on TV, and I was a little bit frustrated by the showing because I was like, oh great, everybody's going to go out and cut down all this yucca. And so I guess I'm curious, what is for us only? How do you know what's for us only? And I guess if you're in your community and you're creating art, it might be easier because you're creating art for your community and not for public consumption. I don't know if there's a question in there that you can answer.
Well, the problem with being an artist like myself is there are no contemporary art centers on Indian reservations, right? So you got to kind of do some compromising, I guess. But as an academic, I could use my brain and I can rationalize doing any number of things. That's what we see going on in Israel and Gaza right now. Rationalization through our brains, right? You know what helps me? Making art from right here, right? I've done some things that I'm ashamed of in my life, right? And my brain can rationalize those things, right? But down here, I know it. I know I did wrong, right? And so working down here, it's a gut feeling. You just know when you're doing something right and when you're doing something wrong. As far as the Pan-Indian stuff, I will say, though, that powwows, every university, you guys have powwow? Every university has a powwow. Powwow is not our way, but powwows, ribbon skirts, smudge sticks, I kind of see those, I try to stay optimistic, actually. I see them as gateway drugs, right? Remember we used to tell, if you smoke marijuana, then you're going to be doing heroin next, kind of thing. I don't think that's true, right? But I do think that oftentimes things like that lead people, well, what about me? What about our history? What about our customs and traditions? And so hopefully it leads people to that deeper understanding. But I do see the dangers, right? And like what Rupert Costa was warning us, be careful. You have to be careful and you have to have respect. And that's the other thing too. How do I say this? I don't feel the need to introduce myself in the Cahuilla language when I'm not around Cahuilla people, right? In my belief, and this is a little bit of how I'm a jerk, I guess, you got to earn that right to hear me speak the language, to be honest with you, And I don't need to prove anything to anybody, right? And like you're saying, when I went to my elder, I explained who I was, not how I identify, but who my family is, who claim me, right? And that's that kinship. So do you understand, when we were surviving for, let's just say 10,000 years, right? Nobody gave a crap how you identified, whether it was gender or if it was, like relationship or whatever. Get to work, help us survive, contribute to the community. That's what was important. This emphasis on the individual, where you end up saying I and me a lot. That's the language of the colonizer, right? That's one thing that we've internalized, right? And so, and I'm there with you. I've struggled with that too, right? I was actually asked to dig for a funeral this morning, right? But I'm not home, and so I will tell you, getting back to wellness, right? It's hard for me to be an academic and to be an artist, because I have obligations at home, and when those conflict, I feel bad. I wish I was home right now helping out, They'd probably be eating right now, actually. But you see what I'm saying? Those are the things you have to deal with in the contemporary world, to try to be traditional, but then also to have these other obligations, right? It's a struggle.
Back in the day, I was a kid, and I was preparing some sage sticks, which was grandfather sage with mugwort, which is more of a traditional shoe mash smudge. And Hollywood really screwed everybody up. Everybody thought it was always white sage. I go, no, that's used for cooking. And they're looking at me, they're going, what? And I'm going, well, this is what my grandmother told me, and this is what I lived by. And all of a sudden, half of Santa Barbara got rid of all the white sage, and they were trying to look for mugwort in the creeks to make their. I'm going, the truth is so simple. Quit watching TV. And that's what we do out in the real world is we have all these facades. And most of the ones that we hold on to are the ones we detest the most because that seed sticks in our brain. And so we have to keep ourselves abreast and keep the camera and the radars on to see what the truth is, because the peripheral, it shines more than the inside. And so you did a great job, and I really appreciate what you did today. You're a good man.
Well, the advice I have is just go sit with the old people and shut up. Just go there and help out and just be quiet and just wait for the wisdom to be dropped on you, you know?
Yeah, that's why I told you earlier today I was helping these elderly women with deficiency problems, and the hospitals were hating me because I was there as a witness, and I'm going, this is how you take care of the village, just by action. Forget the writing, forget the proclamations and all the promises, just go in and just do it. And all of a sudden it becomes wildfire. Now they're beginning to become nice and more receptive to assisting these elderly people. Can you imagine going to a rehab and all of a sudden there's no heat in the building and you're 76 years old, you know, and you're going, wow, this is worse than Halloween. Where the heck am I? And so I just want to thank you very much for showing up.
You're welcome. Yeah,
thank you very much.
Was there no?
Hey, this is a question from our Zoom participant, so I'll just read it out. Thank you so much for your presentation and amazing art. Do you have any suggestions as to how to express our sadness over being dominated and how to be an activist to overcome this mindset so that we are not part of the paradigm of the dominant culture?
I would just say one of the things I heard earlier that I don't really agree with is you have to heal heal yourself before you can help your community. Helping your community is healing yourself. It's the same thing. And so helping out, you know, it just makes me feel so good and takes my mind off of my own issues or whatever, you know. And that's what keeps me going, you know. And well, I brought this up there and I forgot to mention it. You guys remember COVID, right? This is my right not to wear this mask, right? Americans, they say Americans are born with rights, and I was born with responsibilities and obligations, and going and seeing my 89-year-old aunt, I had an obligation to her to get my ass vaccinated, right? You know, that's how I protect my community. It's not about me, right? It's not about my rights, right? So I would say work with, making art is a physical activity. And for me, the selfish aspect of being an artist is I get to work. Physical work helps my soul, helps my mind, soothe me, right? That's the selfish part of what I do. But working for my community is what heals my soul too, you know? It's really important, I think. Right on.
Thank you so much.
Oh, appreciate all your attention and such. It's again, I'm humbled, and it's a blessing that we're all here together.
If you want to run for mayor, I'll vote.
I was on tribal council, so people always say, well, should we call you professor or artist or whatever? I said, I was on tribal council. I was called a lot of things back in the day. But yeah, I appreciate it. And actually, just quickly, if any of you are down in Southern California, there's currently an exhibit at the Benton Museum of Art on the campus of Pomona College. And they've done something foundational, different than before, is they have a huge basket collection. And for the last 2 years, they've invited tribal people to come in, to hold the baskets, to pray to the baskets, to sing to the baskets, in preparation for a basket exhibit that they have now. And so my basket is shown right alongside, it's so humbling, right? Alongside these baskets that are 100 years old. And then on the opposing wall is a poem by my daughter, Emily Clarke. And you know, it was really, really satisfying. So if you get down that way, go check it out.
So we wanted to thank you.
Well, good, because it's cold in here. You guys cold? It's kind of cool in here.
You know, it's generation. This is the
Something is mountains.
Oh, thank you.
See the colors.
Jeremy, I said thank you.